good.
6:30, the December 7th, 2015 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting is called to order. Madam Clerk, can we have the roll, please?
Ms. Dean? Here. Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Spring?
Here.
Mr. Strike?
Here.
Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Spinelli?
Here.
Mr. Sporhays? Mr. Kinch has been excused. Thank you.
Could I have a motion to adopt the meeting minutes from November 2nd, please? Motion by Ms. Dean. I need a second. Mr. Walker, thank you. Any objection to adopting these minutes? Hearing none, those minutes are adopted. Could I have a motion to adopt the minutes from November 9th? Moved by Mr. Spring, seconded by Mr. Strike. I understand Mr. Spring has some issues with the minutes.
I have, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few edits. On page 7, we're referring to the case involving the rezone from R2M to B3SL, and the motion was to approve the rezoning, I believe, and I think in the first paragraph it says Commissioner Spring will not be supporting the motion. He agreed with the staff report, and the Commission has not been presented with good evidence that there's a need to rezone these properties. So that, I'm not sure exactly what I said, but that would be a contradiction to what I said previously. So if that could be clarified, I appreciate it.
Okay, I believe we have that.
Also, I think you've been laid on the table edits to the same set of minutes on page 10 regarding the voting on amendment number 3. This is the UMed district plan. The voting was identified erroneously. There were 4 in favor and 1 opposed. So that's, I think, has been identified by staff or by the secretary, and you see that in your revised resolution on your desk there. And then on page 15, just a minor little edit. 15, we're talking about the Northern Lights, the Northern Access Road. And it's understandable that mistake was made because it was a little confusing, I know, when we were discussing it. But it should connect to the UMed Northern Access Road instead of Northern Lights Extension. So that's all I got.
So we have a insertion of a word "not" on page 7, the correction that staff has provided on page 10, acknowledging the failure of the Third Amendment, and the change to the UMed Northern Access Road on page 15. That's what we got?
That's correct.
So incorporating those changes, any objections to adopting these minutes? Hearing none, those minutes are also adopted as amended. Disclosures. Any disclosures, Mr. Spring?
I have none.
Ms. Bailey, and welcome.
Thank you. I have none.
Okay. Mr. Strike?
Yes, I do. And in regards to the consent agenda on what's not present for cases D1, A, B, C, D, and E, that's made up of resolutions 2015, 045, 46, 47, 48, and 49. Now, as those cases were heard on different nights, on the first 2 cases, 045 and 46, I did go back and listen to the tape and review the submitted documents that tie to those 2 resolutions, those 2 cases.
Thank you. So you will be voting on those 2 resolutions and abstaining from the other 3?
That's the request, but I believe that has to be, if that's the concurrence of the chair and
Yep.
board.
That would be great. I think we can just reflect that. Is that right? Okay. Mr. Walker?
No disclosures.
Mr. Spinelli?
None.
Ms. Dean?
None.
And I was not present for those first 2 resolutions. I will not be voting on D1A or D1B, and of course Ms. Bailey will not be voting on any of those as this is her first meeting. So, and I have no other disclosures. So with that, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, please? It's moved by Mr. Strike, seconded by Ms. Dean. Anyone wishing to pull an item from the consent agenda? Mr. Spring.
Yes, I'd like to pull D1D, Resolution 2015-48.
Thank you.
UMed District.
Any other items to pull from the consent agenda? No. Please vote on items D1A, B, C, and E.
Question.
Yes.
I'm voting on D1, A, and B, but not C, D, and E.
I think that
Going to make note? Add
the
note? Got it.
yeah, Lori's going to just make sure we do, and do we have enough votes to pass those resolutions? We do. Okay. That portion of the consent agenda is approved. Mr. Spring, can I have a resolution on or a motion on resolution 2015-048?
I move to approve the resolution.
Thank you. Can I get a second? Seconded. Mr. Spring.
Just kind of a follow-up on the minutes that I just discussed. On page 4, item 34 related to the UMed District Plan comment response table. That needs to be corrected to indicate that the amendment number 3 failed, and I believe it originally mentioned it had passed. So, and staff has given us handed out a revised resolution to that effect.
Thank you. So Mr. Spring is clarifying that what we're voting on is the revised version of our resolution and table that accompanies the resolution, recognizing that item 34, amendment number 3, failed. So with that, are there any other questions or issues on this resolution? Seeing none, please vote. That resolution is approved. Could I please have a motion to postpone case 2015-0106? I believe it's been requested that this case be postponed until our next meeting on 12/14. Thank you, Mr. Strike and Mr. Walker. Any objection to that postponement? Hearing none, that meeting is moved. Ms. McConnell, does that get put before or after the marijuana ordinance?
It will be before.
Okay. Lucky them. Let's see. Okay, our case up for tonight is case 2015-0105. I'll read the procedure. The procedure by which the public may speak to the Commission at its meeting is, after the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the Chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission Rules of Procedures. Petitioners, including all of his or her representatives, have 10 minutes. Part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representatives of groups such as community councils, PTAs, 5 minutes, and individuals, 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the Clerk's office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. Can we please have a staff report for case 2015-0105?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The request before you is a conditional use for natural resource extraction to allow a portion of an existing material storage site to be utilized for disposal of unusable materials from road construction projects. The nearly 17.5-acre property is located in Chugiak on the southeast side of the New Glen Highway, north of Kerbo Lane, and west of the Old Glen Highway. Previously, the property was owned by the state of Alaska and was excavated for road construction. Ownership transferred to the municipality in 2001. The site is zoned PLI. Loretta French Park is located to the east and south of the petition site, and it is zoned PLI-P and PLI. The New Glen Highway abuts the northwest corner of the site. A 68-acre parcel zoned PC adjoins the west petition site boundary, and it's undeveloped at this time. There's also R6 zone property to the north, which is also undeveloped. Access to the petition site is from Kerbo Lane. It is an improved paved right-of-way via the Old Glen Highway. Kerbo Lane is not a dedicated right-of-way. Neither an access easement nor a public use easement has been recorded for Kerbo Lane. It is a driveway that serves Loretta French Park and the current petition site. Pedestrian access to the site is prohibited to this property. It is fenced with a locked gate, and only authorized vehicles are permitted access to this site. Eagle River Street Maintenance does propose to dispose of unusable material from road projects in Eagle River in a portion of the petition site. Materials from ditch cleaning will also be placed in the proposed fill site, which may contain organics. The materials will include silts, sands, gravels, and/or organics, as mentioned before. Based on the type of fill material, the site will not be suitable for development in the future. Park or open space would be the only suitable use for this fill site. There will be no manufactured or hazardous materials placed in the site according to the application. The site needs to be large enough to accommodate an estimated 150,000 cubic yards of material from road construction and maintenance projects for the next 6 to 8 years. Phasing of the operation will depend on the need for and funding of road projects and the need to dispose of fill from road construction and/or road improvement projects, and on periodic ditch cleaning. The site is currently being used as a material storage site for winter sand, which is stored in a heated storage building. It is also used for stockpiling road building materials, including classified gravels, bedding materials, rock, drainage pipe, and drainage structures, as well as storage for maintenance vehicles utilized to support the road maintenance. If vehicles are parked on the property, the parking areas need to be shown on the site plan. Much of the site has been cleared of vegetation. Historically, the site was used by the state for road construction projects. However, there is natural vegetation that remains on the perimeter of the site, of the excavated portion of the site, consisting of birch, alder, spruce shrubs with a vegetative mat cover. The application states that all existing perimeter vegetation is to be retained. The site is served by electricity and gas, but there is no well on the site. The petition site is not located in an avalanche hazard zone, has a low to moderate mass wasting potential, is located in an area of low to moderately low ground failure susceptibility in the event of a seismic occurrence, and is not subject to high velocity winds. The proposed fill operation is not expected to have any impact on public services. A dust control program involving water and truck cleaning, if necessary, will be part of the approval of a conditional use. Surface water runoff is managed on site through a pipe drainage system that directs drainage to the sediment pond located in the northwest corner of the site. The site currently operates under an updated stormwater pollution prevention plan that also assures surface water quality. The department does recommend, the division does recommend approval of the conditional use subject to conditions found on pages 18, 19, and 20 of the packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. I'll remind commissioners that we're here to prove that the CUP conforms to the general conditional use standards as well as the conditional use standards that are specific to natural resource extraction. A question from Ms. Dean.
Through the chair, Ms. O'Brien, could you tell us about the difference of this application as opposed to the application for Anchorage Sand and Gravel on their Lucy Pit, which is, I think, pretty similar materials? Is that correct?
Through the chair, Ms. Dean, the Lucy Pit was or is in the process, I think it's nearing completion,
Yes.
of non-qualified fill. And that was always intended to create park open space. It was never intended to be developed to support residential structures or a school, anything of that nature. It could not support couldn't support structures because it is a non-qualified fill.
Isn't this the same thing, or are they planning on putting a structure on top of this later?
Based on the silt, sand, and a mixture of gravel and organics, the site that's all non-qualified fill and would not be able to support a structure. The metal storage facility is already built and on site, and it wouldn't be located, it's not located on the area that is to be filled.
So would you say that the Lucy Pit that Anchorage Sand and Gravel has is a very similar site and conditional use permit as to this one?
There are similarities, yes. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. Spring.
Yes, through the chair. Is Kerbo Lane paved road or is it a gravel road?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, it's a paved road. It's constructed paved road.
Is it adequate for truck traffic? It seemed like there was an issue with the adequacy of the road when we reviewed the Monofill site along the same area. I don't remember exactly what the comment was, but I think there was some public review comment regarding the adequacy of the road. Do you remember that? Were you involved in that one? I forget.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, yes, it was a gravel road at that time, and it apparently had some part of the base may have been failing. The applicant may be able to supply more information as to the nature of what improvements were made to Kerbo Lane.
Okay, that's fine. That's
But
what
there were some
I didn't realize it was improved. I'll hear more from the.
There were some problems of it sloughing.
Second question involves the Glen Highway screening provisions. Let me correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe you can tell me. Is it a 30-foot screening setback from the property line?
Through the chair, I believe it's 30 feet.
I'm not sure this meets, the existing screening meets that provision then. It looks like they showed the extent of the existing vegetation. I couldn't tell whether or not it met it. I mean, there's obviously a lot of vegetation from the pictures that I've seen, submitted with the application, but it's hard to tell if that's on the property or that's in the right-of-way, and it seems that the provisions require that it be on the property itself. So I'm not sure that I am convinced that they meet the screening setback or not. I guess that's a rhetorical question, but
I didn't measure whether the vegetation, there was 30 feet of screening vegetation on property. I, too, thought there's a lot of vegetation that was retained and may have assumed that it was on property.
it looks like it's probably pretty close, but We want to make sure that they follow the requirements, of the Title 21 like any, private
Yeah.
developer would. So
That's understood, yeah.
maybe we can make that a condition of approval, that it be reviewed or something, but
Yes,
that's my question. Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Mr. Strike.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair, to the staff. Question to the staff again. Was this site always envisioned for this particular type of use? I know that in reading my pamphlet, my booklet here, that it was previously owned by the state and that this property was deeded back over to the city. I don't see that there's not much excavation, so the excavation has already taken place and that this site will then be used for fill. And so where I'm going with my question is, was there any preparatory done on this site to, for example, a liner, any type of preparation for handling this type of materials that would be coming in?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, because the nature of the materials going in are proposed to be non-hazardous, and that they were going to consist of gravels, sand, and silt, there probably is not any, the application didn't state that there was any liner that was going to be placed in the pit area or the area to be filled. And as I recall from the monofill application, which was going to be tires and building waste and manufactured waste, DEC requirements did not require a liner for that, which could contain hazardous materials, but DEC requirements did not require a liner for the monofill that was proposed on the property to the west of this current petition site. So with sands, gravels, and silt, I don't believe that a liner would have been required from my recollection of reading those DEC regulations.
My experience in preparing other properties for using construction fill, now granted it was type C material that was being brought in, we had to put a liner in. And while I concur, and I'm satisfied with the answer, right up until I see ditch cleaning. And having been involved in many projects involving ditch cleaning on federal and state roads throughout the country, I've yet to have ditch cleaning materials clean. And therefore, my concern is we're talking about no contaminants, but my experience has been ditch cleaning materials, in many instances, we don't control what has been spilled, but then when we bring that in, many of that is contaminated. So we would be introducing a possibility of introducing contaminants to the site that may or may not have been planned for this type of activity in the past, but now we're looking to use this site for this purpose. Additionally, now we're looking at having contractors bringing in fill that's coming off of, I assume, state and or muni road projects. And I've got firsthand cases of state and muni projects where the fill coming off some of these projects is contaminated. And without testing of that material before it leaves those sites, we've had to push fill away from clean areas and send it out to other pits so that it would not be contaminating the sites.
Through the chair, may I ask a question?
Sure.
What kind of contaminants were found in the ditch cleaning and road improvement projects?
Chemicals and road grease and anytime there's been a spill that doesn't get reported unless it's been tested. The very nature of a lot of ditch cleaning isn't just the debris and silt that you normally see, but it's the accumulation of all the, no offense, all the crap that comes off the roads, plus anything that's been spilled and flowing through, because it is a drainage area that is a collection area.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Anything further, Mr. Strike?
No, thank you.
This time I'd like to open, unless there's any other questions for staff. No, I'd like to open the public hearing, beginning with the petitioner. Please come forward. You have 10 minutes. Would you like to reserve any of that time for rebuttal?
Yes.
How much?
What I don't use.
Okay,
If that
you're on your own then.
Through the chair, good evening. My name is Peter Briggs, here in representing the petitioner. With me is Rod Kinney with Rodney P. Kinney Associates, Mark Littlefield with Eagle River Street Maintenance, and John Rada with Parks and Recreation. They're available also for answering any questions. For presentation, the staff report was pretty thorough with saying what the reason for the site is. A few of the questions that have come up, just have some responses to those in addition to any other questions that you might have for us. For the Lucy Pit, discussion was the Lucy Pit really could be a lot of different fill materials. This site really is the fine silts, gravel, and the ditch cleaning materials that were stated. For Curbo Lane, it is currently a chip seal, so it's not an asphalt pavement, it's just a chip seal. For Glen Highway screening, I would direct you to page 61. On that page, there are actually offsets that show that the minimum vegetation is 30 feet. Hopefully it's legible in your copy. It's legible enough in mine. And then the use for the site will only be Eagle River Street Maintenance bringing materials into the site. So there will be no other contractors other than Eagle River Street Maintenance. So with that, I think I've responded to the ones that I could, and I would reserve the rest for questions or rebuttal. Rebuttal, I guess.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the petitioner? Mr. Spring.
Which page did you say the offset was?
I believe that it's page 61. It's a landscape plan. It has dashed line offsets around the perimeter of the site. The type is small.
I don't see 61.
We just have the initial staff report and then your original copy, so maybe you can give us the actual
my
plan.
apologies. It's sheet L1.
What?
Sheet L1 in the landscape plans, CAD drawing.
Thank you very much. Okay. I don't know if I don't want to step on Commissioner Strike's issue, but I was going to ask that too, same idea about the ditch cleaning and regarding the potential for contaminants in that material.
And I would probably put Mark, you available just to address to that? Mark Littlefield with Eagle River Street Maintenance.
Hi, how you doing? The contaminants are there, and they're going to be there, and they're going to infiltrate into the ground. Most of the ditch cleaning we do is not deep ditch. It's basically anything where the land is sloughed off a little bit. We're just basically making the flow line work again, and then we reseed it. I don't know of any contaminants that are there. We've never tested. It's not been a policy. But it's not deep ditch. We're not excavating any ditches. It's just minor ditch cleaning.
Just to follow up, I don't understand the nature of the construction that's expected to occur and the material that would be placed in the pit. There won't be any major, there's not very little major construction that the city maintenance does, right? I mean,
Well, it's all done through our contractor, through Eagle River Street Maintenance. We have a contractor that works specifically for us out there. Anytime that we put in a drainage system, any material that we remove, we have to replace with type 2 classified material. So that material is basically unusable. We have to get rid of it somewhere. So we're looking to save us some money rather than hauling it to a fill site and paying X amount of dollars to get rid of that fill, because we have to get rid of it.
so it's mostly drainage projects then. So
Pretty
it's
much.
not like the state of Alaska is going to come in and rebuild the
No.
Old Glen Highway and they'll
We're-
be putting tons of material there.
We're a
So
very small outfit,
it's
yes.
only that the material that's done through your contracting, the Chugacki River Road Board contracting,
Yes,
that's
sir.
going to go in there.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Strike.
Yes, along the same line of questions there. Eagle River Street maintenance, so we would see possible chip seal extract taken if you were going to go and pave a road, and you might,
Any pavement or pavement-like items are stockpiled, and we crush that and we use it for wrap, so it doesn't go into the fill site. That's a commodity that we don't want to get rid of, so we save that for later.
do you ever test any of your materials coming off some of these maintenance project sites?
No. If we come into a project and we're excavating, we're putting in a storm drain or whatever, and we find some material that is susceptible, or it's even has the potential for being contaminated, we stop. We don't haul that. We'll take that material somewhere else to be processed correctly. It doesn't go into a fill site. We're not going to contaminate that entire site.
Ms. Dean.
Through the chair, could you tell us, and back in October, you had a meeting with the Birchwood Community Council, and the vote was 8-5. I was curious, what were the concerns from the public at that meeting?
You know what, I can't, I hate to talk for them, and I was just more concerned about getting approved or getting their support. There was a few of them that didn't want it, of course, in the area. They would rather have it hauled somewhere else. Other than that, Birchwood just didn't want to see it in their vicinity, so to speak, a fill site.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Mr. Spinelli, then Mr. Strike is back in the queue, too.
So you said this is just mainly going to be used for your small Eagle River jobs, and it looks like a pretty large area to me. How long do you think it'll take you to fill this thing?
If I was going to what we were doing in the past 5 years, which we're not anymore, our scale is a lot smaller than it has been in the past 5 years. I envision that 150,000 yards will probably take us 10 years to fill. It's going to be 10 years.
That's all I had.
Thank you. Mr. Strike.
Yes, through the chair. Will this site be used for snow storage?
No.
And as far as dust issues, I noticed that in the recommendations, we don't address dust storage unless it's required, and then it's ambiguous as to whether or not dust control program was identified to be included. Do you envision that there is going to be or need to be a dust control plan?
We can implement one, yes.
Okay. Is it reasonable, knowing that in the construction world and when contractors are working, you have your hours of operation strictly from Monday through Friday, excluding Saturday and Sunday? Is that reasonable? Do you not envision any Saturday, for example, work, or is that restriction okay?
The restriction is acceptable. We do have in there, hopefully, the clause for an emergency use if something happens on a Saturday and Sunday. We have access to our materials in our site, but during normal construction at 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday.
Because this conditional use limits no Saturday, Sunday.
We haven't worked a Saturday or Sunday in the summer since I've been there, so for the past 5 years.
I'm just wondering, should there be some stipulation in there to allow for
as long as
Saturday operation at your...
As long as we have the emergency use. If an emergency comes up on a weekend and we have to respond with
You would be in violation of the conditional use.
I think it's in there that we need to have an emergency use then.
And that's what
for
I'm
weekends and holidays.
And that's what I'm offering up to ensure
That would
that's
be, yes,
included.
that would be great. We do need to have that in there.
And this is a joint question also to the staff. I see that this is basically an 8-year conditional use. Is that normal? Is it, in the past, we've seen shorter terms for 2 years, at which point we would see reports given as to the compliance of that conditional use. where there would be reports, maybe the dust control or the traffic control as time goes. 8 years appears to be an exceptionally long period of time that I've not seen before. And so my question to the staff is, I know we see Lucy Pit pop in every 2-3 years as a renewal of their conditional use. We see other sites, yet this one's being requested at a full 8-year period.
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, the application asks for 8 years, so I just thought, well, maybe the full 8 years. If the commission finds that that is too long of a period to go forward without reviewing the conditional use permit, then the commission certainly should shorten that up. And now it sounds like it might take 10 years based on the frequency with which they would be placing materials, or the amount of the materials being placed at the site, for them to come back and ask for a time extension.
At 8 years, would you classify this as one of the exceptions to the conditional uses that we have seen for this type of use?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, I believe you're correct. Yes, it is unusual.
And to the petitioner, do you see any hardship in having a shortened conditional use period, at which time you would come back for the obligatory renewal period to give time for review of the operations of the pit? And I would put forth to you, what type of time period would be reasonable? In the past, we've seen, I believe, in a 2 to 3 year period in the municipality.
3 would be great at the minimum. It'd be nice to have 5, but 3 would be great.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Strike?
Through the chair, Commissioner Strike, in response to your question about the dust control, conditions 4E and condition 6 both relate to dust control as being part of the Department of Health and Social Services air quality plan. Do these conditions provide you with the basis that you feel comfortable with what the project needs to do?
What I had found is that there appeared to be a conflict in area B3B, which was on the previous page, where it said some dust will be generated from the fill and grading of the site in spring, summer. A dust control program involving watering and truck cleaning, if necessary, will be part of the approval of a CU. But I don't see where that made it into the actual division recommendations. And so therein was, I'm trying to reconcile those two pieces.
My experience typically is that air control, to the extent that you're talking about, is covered by the air quality plan that DHSS deals with.
If that's your intent and that's what's going to be included in the plan, I'm good.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
I assume you're familiar with, you have a copy of the staff packet that we were provided?
Yes.
Do you object to any of the division recommendations? There's, 12 or 13 of them?
We reviewed these and we didn't have any objections. They all seem quite logical.
Okay. Notice you mentioned the Parks Department is represented here tonight. I will probably hear from them, but I assume they're supporting the project. Looks like they're
yes.
one of the agents.
There's a letter from Parks Director John Rod in here in support of the project.
Okay. Did you? I didn't see anything from Eklutna, but did you guys talk to them at all, or?
It looks like the answer is no.
Okay, but they would have been notified. I'm asking the staff. I mean, they're an adjacent property owner, so I assume Eklutna would have been notified.
Through the chair, yes, Eklutna owns the property to the north and the property to the west, so they would be notified.
Okay, and you haven't heard from them?
Through the chair, no, we didn't hear from them. In fact, all the comments that we received were received this morning or late this afternoon.
Thank you.
Ms. Dean and then Mr. Spring.
Through the chair, I do have a couple of points that may be items that we can talk about adding as recommendations, and that would be that this particular property is not open to the public, and it should be signed that way on the gates that it's not open to the public, so there's no confusion that people can just go up there and get rid of whatever. And that maybe another recommendation could be only municipality of Anchorage can dump at the site or their contractors.
You, Ms. Dean, I think if you are interested, you can make those proposed amendments when we're at the adoption stage. That'd be appropriate.
Yes, I just wanted to discuss it with the petitioner and how they felt about those
Okay.
particular recommendations, if they thought that those were reasonable
Thank you.
and would be things that they would want to have or not have, or if they had an opinion.
And for information, it is a fenced and a gated site that is clearly labeled as being a municipality of Anchorage site, but I'm not certain whether there is any description saying public keep out or anything like that.
No, but we can easily remedy that.
And then as for having only the municipality of Anchorage be able to dump there and their contractors dump there.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Spring, you're out. Did you get your question answered related to
That's
Kerbo
exactly-
Lane?
Yes, and then I was going to ask the same question as Commissioner Dean regarding the provision limiting the dumping to municipality of Anchorage Road Board or subcontractors or contractors.
Okay.
So, that's good.
I don't see anything else in the queue. Mr. Briggs, you have 8 minutes and 40 seconds left for rebuttal. I'd like to invite others wishing to testify down to the podium, please. Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Good evening. My name is Tim Potter with Dowell. Tonight I'm representing myself. Eklutna is in the audience tonight. I did represent them at a Chugiak Community Council meeting in which we did indicate our desire to have materials tested at the source and certification assurance that no hazardous materials were disposed of on site. Since I'm not representing Eklutna tonight, I'm here on the basis of several decades of working on these kinds of projects and looking for some continuity, as I believe Mr. Strike and Commission Member Dean were looking for a little bit earlier. It is interesting that whether it's by who the staff person is, what experience they have, or previous history on a piece of property, or maybe even that this is kind of a public entity, the continuity and the consistency of the requirements don't seem to be following through. So I handed out a brief 2-page memo to you at the start of the meeting. Hopefully you may have had a chance to skim it. And it's really boiled down in essence to what I believe are the key issues and the key points, and ones that we have certainly, and all the rest of my clients, whether it was Anchorage Sand and Gravel at the Sand Lake Pit, Lucy Pit, Eklutna and Davis Constructors at their Site 1, Site 4, or Granite Construction with their Birchwood gravel extraction site, which in that case was removing material but still had a significant number of requirements attached to it, is looking at it. First off, I just really wanted to question, and maybe even it's a superfluous issue at this point if the road board wants to do what it's proposing to do. But since the planning objective states that material disposal charges can be avoided and the dollars for the property taxpayers can be better used and more efficiently used, it would be interesting to see some conclusive analysis showing what that does. And the reason I ask that is that there is no free lunch. We've figured that out over time. So now you take a piece of property and render it unusable for their purposes going into the future when we're dealing with where our major growth pattern is moving to and going to be over the next 20, 30, 50 years. And I'm suggesting that we are going to eliminate a significant chunk of this property, and we won't have a large enough facility to meet the future needs of the community, and there'll have to be some additional land acquired, and that there's a cost. There's a cost for operation. There's a cost for operating the equipment, which will be done by the contractor under the term contract, and I get that. Lastly, just to wrap up, is over on the operating impact side. Will there be contact information posted on the gate so that 24 hours a day someone can call if there's a problem going on or there's stuff being drug out onto the old Seward Highway? Hours of operation in the case submittal in the application, it was not limited to Monday through Friday. It had Saturday, Sunday operations and did not preclude holidays.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. I do see a question in the queue. Mr. Strike.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. Yes, thank you, Mr. Potter, for that testimony. I would point out that in the division recommendations, number 7, it does limit it to Monday through Friday. And
Right.
in the discussions that we've had here, whether or not one of the possible recommendations might be for a Saturday for emergency type of use to keep them in compliance. But you made note of that. And these are my words, this is, I think, what I heard you say, and that was the inconsistencies that you felt that there may be between this petitioner's request, i.e. possibly being a municipal or city request, versus the, what we would refer to as the private industry, where we see some possible conflicts. Can 2 or 3 come to mind right off the bat? I know your note here, but what strikes you as the biggest concern of the inconsistency that you're seeing?
How about testing the groundwater adjacent to the facility, whether you're taking material out or putting material in? I can show you the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars that has been required to be spent by a variety of different operators to ensure that they had a baseline statement of contamination as to whether it was there or not before materials were disposed and put either taken out or put into the ground. That would be one. Dust control is one thing, but if you go and look at everybody else's requirements, they have requirements for equipment to be at the ready to come out and clean the streets. Anchored sand and gravel for both Lucy Street and the Sand Lake Pit, although the material may be a little bit more organic and some siltier in some cases. It does get drug a long ways. They have a requirement for a tire wash system, which also is not cheap. Rumble strips, all kinds of things developed. I don't see any of that. The other thing is, you know, if you remember the discussions about Lucy Pit and the discussions on Anchored Sand and Gravel Sand Lake Pit and some of the Site 1, which is by Eklutna Village, requirements that as we're bringing material back in, that we have to make sure that we're certifying that the materials are not contaminated. And in the Lucy Pit and the Sand Lake Pit, that was done in an excruciating fashion of the type of lifts that could go in at any one time, how it had to happen. It had to be sniff test at the source. We had to get certification from the contractor that was bringing the material that it had been tested at its source and was found to be not above any of the restricted requirements. And then we had to have sniffing on like every 5th truck or load at the site when it was dumped. We keep camera coverage of all that. The other thing is that you were absolutely correct in bringing up your 8-year period. The typical is a 5-year approval, and with the requirement that you come back for review by planning and zoning at 5 years. But there's also another requirement that the other operators have to do, and that's every year at the end of the year, they provide a new aerial photo and a narrative indicating how many yards of material came in, and the photograph has to be mapped out to show where it went. They have to submit a report from code enforcement to determine whether or not there were any complaints filed concerning that project. and that goes to code enforcement and the planning department on an annual basis, and I don't see that. So there's a few.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
Mr. Potter, you suggested, and I think, and I just want to confirm what it is that you're saying here, is that if they fill this site with poor soils, that the future demand for sand storage or whatever else is being done on the site at this time will basically, we won't have the site available for that?
At a minimum, you have to extract out the area of the slopes that are going to be established as you bring this thing up 35 feet in height.
Right.
So if you extract that out, figure out how many acres is involved there that you can't use. That's square footage right off the top that you can't utilize. Now you've bifurcated the site so you don't get the advantage of a larger site for moving equipment, moving materials, doing all kinds of things. Bigger flat site gives you more flexibility as you move into the future. Now, I believe that they could still operate that top platform for storing pipe or storing sand or storing other things. You heard maybe tonight that, discussion it was going to be a future park use or something else. I don't know. But I do know that where the land is for future growth for the community, Anchorage as a whole, is northeast, that being Eagle River, Chugiak, Birchwood. And I think that the requirements for road maintenance is going to get larger and larger and larger, and that the requirements for having readily available pipe, sand, gravel, rock, all kinds of things, so that they can meet their needs, both on a scheduled basis and emergency basis, is going to be bigger than it is today.
Thank you.
I had a few others in the queue. It appears everyone has dropped out. Any other questions for Mr. Potter? No, thank you, Mr. Potter. Anyone else wishing to testify?
Good evening. My name is Steve Connolly, C-O-N-N-E-L-L-Y. I'm the lands manager with Eklutna Incorporated. And we just have a couple of concerns with this permit. I think one is Eklutna, along with a lot of other private entities in Anchorage, have spent considerable time and money developing our own disposal sites. And we question the economics of this one, and if it really is going to be saving the taxpayers money when there are these other sites out there, and we've never been approached for fees or for what it would cost for a contract to dump there. It was brought up. We would definitely like to see it only be Subursa projects if this goes through. So there's not every contractor in town that's going to this site. The other issue is we're sensitive to off-site contamination, and it's a big issue, and it's hard to track what's coming in. You need procedures. I've worked in the construction industry. Other sites I've worked at, and including Eklutna's, and you need to verify where it's coming from. But even a greenfield virgin site can bring in contaminated material because you don't know what's been down there through the years. So every load that comes in needs to be examined, whether it's sniffed by an environmental person or something to see what's there, visual examination, maybe put it off on the side there and leave it till it can be checked before you just go dump it and push it. So we'd like to see some definite procedures there for what's going to be, how the loads are going to be handled coming in, because it's a difficult thing. And you really can't just trust somebody and say, well, it's from this site and it's okay, because you never know. Those are the only two real concerns we have.
Thank you. You have a question, Mr. Strike?
Yes, thank you, and through the chair, thank you for your testimony. You indicate that Eklutna has disposal sites in the area. What would be the closest site that you have that could handle this type of material?
It's Mass X is running the site at Eklutna, and then we also have another site that's at Potter Ridge.
What's the approximate distance?
Boy, I'm not sure. It's right at the Eklutna exit. So from the North Birchwood to there, yeah, I'm not sure how many miles it is.
And based on the testimony and the review, your site could handle this material?
Oh, yes, it could, yeah.
Did your site require any special preparation to handle this type of material?
I've been with Eklutna since April, and I'm not familiar with that. The site has a long history of permitting going back years, so I'm not sure what the provisions and what was done and how that was handled.
Okay.
But I know MassX is very vigilant. I know the foreman there quite well, and they are eyeballing every load that comes in and making sure that it's good material and it's not contaminated.
Okay. Thank you.
I have another question, Mr. Spinelli.
So you had mentioned requiring some monitoring of the loads coming in, and then you just referred to MassX eyeballing every load. I'm just curious, would having the municipality eyeball the loads be good enough?
Well, I guess I threw out that term. I said eyeball. When I said eyeball, I mean they're visually inspecting the loads. If they see something funny, they're going to get an environmental consultant out there to check the load to see if there's any contamination. Because we're on top of MassX there. They're our operator there, and so we're also on them all the time. And I am out at the site to make sure of what they're doing out there.
But that's basically the procedure: is look for something that smells like dirty dirt.
It smells. Usually, it's Diesel Range Organics coming in. That's the biggest thing. All the time, and you can see it, and you can also smell it. And so they do not sample every single load that comes in and run it through a lab.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further questions.
Okay.
Anyone else wishing to testify?
Hi, good evening, Commissioners. My name is Maria Rentz, R-E-N-T-Z. I'm the president of the Chugach Community Council, and maybe I can shed some light on Ms. Dean's questions, but I would like to make a couple of points first.
Ms. Rentz, are you speaking on behalf of the Community Council?
I am speaking on behalf of the Council. I am here to present our resolution to you, and also I would like to clarify something. I just picked up a copy of today's supplementary packet, G1, supplementary packet 1. At the very last sheet that was attached was my draft of our council resolution to Mr. Littlefield and to our Subursa rep, who's also the Subursa chair, Randy McCain. That draft should not have been included in the packet. It was for their comment. Unfortunately, it did get included. I do see that also in the packet is included the final letter, that our resolution that I sent out this morning, and if you don't have that, I do have copies of that for you here. So that being said, the other couple of corrections or things I'd like to address is there are some inconsistencies in the planning department's packet to you. For example, we did one of the issues is that Kerbo Lane is not a dedicated road right-of-way. It is a park driveway. So those are the type of things that unfortunately are misrepresented in the packet. And also, the other thing, I do believe, Mr. Littlefield, that your that lot that contains this potential site is actually it is signed authorized users only. It's gated access and so on. So I'm not sure if more signage is needed than that. But that being said, so I'm going to just very quickly go through our resolution to you because unfortunately, when these things come to our attention, this first came to the Chugach Community Council in October. Mr. Littlefield came to present the project to us. And since it was introduced at that October meeting, we do not take action on especially on a big issue in our community until we give sufficient notice to all our members via all the different ways that we notify them, including email, that this will be taken up at the November meeting. So by the time it was taken up at the November meeting, I believe it was probably past the formal comment period that we were required to respond by. So timing is always a bit of an issue on these things. So our resolution is premised on firstly, on something that has been a very important issue in our council, and that is that, well, let me just read it verbatim to you. We voted on to support the CUP, and the vote was 6 in favor, 0 opposed, and 3 abstaining. First and foremost, we support the conditional use permit on the condition that such use is in compliance with all state and federal land patents associated with the subject parcel and all parcels owned by the municipality and managed by the Department of Parks and Recreation in the vicinity of Loretta French Park. So, and I can give you background on that as well, and I can also give you a copy of the state patent that conveyed that land to the municipality of Anchorage. And then if it is confirmed by the municipal attorney's office, and Mr. Rada probably has some fresh information on that as of this afternoon, it's new to me. If it is confirmed by the municipal attorney's office that it conforms with the land patents, the council supports the CUP with the following conditions. And the first one is based on Mr. Potter's attendance at our meeting where the issue of contamination was brought up. So we wrote that into our resolution that in consideration of the potential for contamination of air, land, and water of publicly and privately owned properties by the disposed materials, Eagle River Street Maintenance and its contractors shall certify that the disposed materials have been inspected and deemed suitable for disposal at the site. And then in consideration of surrounding residential and recreational uses of nearby properties, the normal operating hours should be limited to Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And we do state that allowances for operation beyond normal days shall be permitted for emergency situations only. So that is out there. One additional request that came to me after our November meeting was that we ask street maintenance and their contractors to consider using a white noise backup system instead of the beep, 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 because it is surrounded by recreational areas, and also because it is downhill of residential, fairly large residential developments, and that noise really carries up the hill.
Thank you, Ms. Rentz. Just to be clear, this last comment was not specifically in your resolution, so can I just ask where that comment was coming from?
This one about the noise backup, correct? It was not. It came from at least 2 members of my community council.
Okay. You do have a question, Mr. Strike?
Yes, and through the chair, thank you again for your testimony. In your first recommendation regarding, you used the term inspected. I guess I wanted to hear what the council's interpretation is, or what they're thinking of that word. That is a very broad and generalized term.
It is, and I use that word because I really don't know what the standard would be. This is not my expertise, nor was it anyone's present at the meeting. Mr. Potter had some ideas as to what would be agreeable, but I just wanted the idea of this out there. What it is certainly would be something that experts should agree to.
And I think you heard the testimony from the petitioner, which referenced their inspection process, and I would characterize that in my words again here, paraphrasing, would be a visual and sniff test that's done in the field to ascertain whether or not they felt there were contaminants, at which point they would then take other actions. Is that what you're referring to, and is that a satisfactory type of inspection that you're referencing here?
I'm really not trying to reference any specific type of inspection. I would really like that to be something that is described by people who know what this should be, not myself nor anybody that I can think of that had any more specific ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more question, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, in the past, when we heard the application for the monofill, we heard some testimony regarding the impacts to the new trail along the Oakland Highway.
Oh, yes.
Any comment from your community council regarding that?
Well, that's always a concern when you have a significant number of trucks crossing that new trail, and that would be something that maybe also answers Ms. Dean's question about what some of the other concerns were that were discussed. So it was certainly that. And I think the noise and the traffic concerns probably, and the potential for contamination and pollution were the biggest. Oh, and of course the concern that it is, first of all, it has to be in compliance with the state patent. So the state patent, if you aren't aware, was issued when the land was conveyed to the municipality by the state, and and Kerbo Lane specifically, which is on lot 15, is the park driveway. And the land patent says, among other lots here, that lot 15 is subject to a use restriction for public recreational purposes only. So I've questioned that. I personally have questioned that since way back when the Eklutna for-profit private use of Kerbo Lane was allowed as their access to the 68 acres that was eventually rezoned and overturned this body's recommendation. And I believe it is still in the master plan as allowing them to have access. So I think it would be, since Mr. Rada has some new information on that, I think it might shed some light on that for all of us.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify?
Thank you.
Anyone else? Hearing and seeing none, I'll invite the petitioner back for your 8 minutes and 44 seconds of rebuttal.
Through the chair, Peter Briggs, in rebuttal time. So a number of questions have been presented tonight, kind of late coming to us. We'd request that the ones relevant to CUP criteria be resolved with staff. So there are a few of these that, in the list of Mr. Potter's questions that was submitted, there are a few of those that could be dealt with at the staff level. If there are any that the Commission feels are essential to review the case tonight, we'd be happy to do our best to answer. But due to the lateness of these questions, we may not have the answers readily at hand. From a protocol point of view, since a fair number of questions are in front of you, are we allowed to use rebuttal time to not necessarily try to hit all of the points that have been said, but to provide answers to questions that you might have?
Yeah, you can use your time however you want, and if there are other questions beyond that, you're going to be given a little bit of grace period there.
So I would just say that if there are any outstanding questions you would like clarification on, we're happy to provide responses to that. And we just request if there are any additional conditions that you feel that you might like to apply to this, that we have a chance to perhaps discuss those just to verify them.
Thank you. Mr. Strike.
Yes, thank you. And start with a few of the questions. What size trucks are you seeing coming through on this road? Because we're hearing that this is a recreational road. We heard from the staff that it was paved, but now we understand it is chip sealed only. Is that correct?
I'll defer to Mark Littlefield again.
So it is not a fully improved road. Therefore, are we looking at side dumps? Are we looking at double pup trucks? Or are we looking at the occasional half-load 10-yard dump truck coming?
All the above.
Okay.
All the above.
So small, medium, and obviously then large projects to involve double pups and side dumps.
Well, very rarely do we haul double pups. It's usually an end dump only and a side dump.
Okay.
We do have the capabilities for pups, so.
And you heard some questions about tracking the material coming in and the resources that private industry has in tracking this material, where it's come from and going in, you know, in the private industry testing that material. In the reports here, there's no reference to groundwater, any groundwater testing or permeable liners that have been placed on the site. Is that an omission? Is that a afterthought? Is this a didn't think it needed to be done? I'm not sure.
The groundwater that we're referring to, none of the water leaves the site. It goes into a set basin that was designed when we originally designed the site, long before my time in 2001. In a torrential rainstorm, none of the water leaves the site. It stays in the said pond. It never crested the berm of the said pond. So it stays on site. It does infiltrate into the groundwater, but
But we have a creek that goes through this site.
no, the creek is much farther down the road from us.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Is there any, in the recommendations that have come, is there any issue that you see in limiting the materials strictly to that from municipal city lands brought in by municipal direct contractors or city contractors, Eagle River contractors? And the idea is that not seeing, I'm going to call it alien materials coming from other sites. I have witnessed other parcels that consistently contractors are trying to put contaminated soils into the closest area and bury it with the clean fill and make it somebody else's problem and get rid of it. And I'll deny to anybody here, it is happening. And it is a mode of operandi in this town.
with the exception of an occasional Parks and Rec truck that a very small pickup truck that they have to get rid of some materials. It is strictly coming from our projects in Subversive, period. No other contractor will come in there unless they're delivering asphalt from a road project, which we get the asphalt again to crush wrap in the future years. No other contractor but our contractor will be allowed in that site.
Have you started to use this site already for this type of?
We've basically leveled off behind the new sand storage building, and that's it. And we've cut down the trees.
So no material has been brought in at this time?
No, the only material that's in there was excavated out from where they dug out our sand storage building foundation.
I know you're probably not the right person to ask this, but this is a large site. You've got 10, I'm going to guess the number is probably closer to 12 to 13 years it's going to take to fill this area. It is a large tract. We heard from the community council, but we also heard from Eklutna that they or no one else was approached for other alternative sites, such that this property could have been used more directly into the recreational arena as it's been brought in. Is there any thought as to using alternative sites?
In 2015, we had to utilize Mass X site. We've utilized that one, and there's another fill site at the end of Torkelson Road. We had to use that one. When they are in the vicinity of our excavation, we're going to utilize that because it's cost effective. All the rest of it would come to this fill site because our materials are there that we're pulling from. So it's basically cost effective for the truck to come in and deposit its load, pick up the material, and go back to the site. Last year we used Mass X. They were the bid for our contractor. So we were pulling material from their site and taking our spoils to their site.
And we heard testimony about the rumble strips and about the tire wash stations and the equipment that is being required of other contractors. Just as you went to Mass X, your trucks went through the rumble strips and the tire cleaners and so forth. Does this site envision having those types of controls, or is that built into any of these plans that would be submitted?
We have a sweeper that's under contract, and he's always there. We always have a water truck. Dust control is paramount to us because it's not fun to deal with dust, and it is a recreational piece of property that serves two other pieces of the Loretta French Park. So we're real cognizant of the dust and the material, but if we need to put a rumble strip in there, we need to have the issue of the viability of the driveway finished before we put in a rumble strip, but it can be done.
Well, I can speak as a contractor where I had a piece of property. Mm-hmm. I had to put a street cleaner on site, water trucks on site. I had to do rumble strips, and I had to place tire wash cleaning stations in there pursuant to the municipality's requirements. Why shouldn't you?
I'm not saying we won't. If it's a requirement that we have to, then we will.
I will.
We have a sweeper on site, and we have water trucks on site. This isn't a paved road. It's more or less a dirt road. It's just got a small chip seal surface, a little bit of rotomillings, and it serves its purpose for access.
But the rules that are applied to the private industry, do they apply to the municipality or the?
I don't see why they shouldn't.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. Mr. Spring and then Ms. Dean.
Yeah, the question came up regarding the cost of not utilizing the site and what you pay for disposing of it now. Do you have any information regarding that?
The current costs, one site we pay $2 a cubic yard, another site's $3.50. So when you start adding up 10,000 cubic yards, it adds up really, really fast. So that money we'd be saving hauling to our site just in disposal fees.
So you said, through the chair, you said that you primarily haul it to private sites, not the municipal regional landfill.
The municipal regional landfill is $40 a ton.
So you don't take it there?
No.
And it's probably not necessary. These MassX is not a line site, right?
They're, in some facilities where we're working, and some projects are close, but they're really far out there. I mean, they can be used. Is that what?
Well, no, my question. First of all, I don't know where these sites are. Are these sites have lined or?
Oh, I have no idea. I've never asked the question.
And just one other off-the-wall question. You may not know the answer. What does ArtSet do with their materials that they take off their streets? What do they dispose of them?
Lucy Pit.
Oh, the Lucy Pit?
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Dean.
Through the chair, I have two questions. The first one is, what testing does MassX require of your loads when they come in?
I don't have an answer for that.
Okay. The next question is, looking at the map area there, to the east of your property, is that additional property that you guys have? To the east? Behind the ball fields there? Is that where you're?
Oh, that's part of Loretta French Park. That's the Aero Club and the horse stables and the archery. That's part of Loretta French Park.
Okay, so that's not your area at all. Your lot is, you only use that one lot in that area. There's no others. Okay, so you're not, okay. That was it. Thank you.
Mr. Walker.
I have a question for the staff, and then I have a question or some questions for the applicant. For the staff, can you tell us, maybe Erica, do we have a duty here to consider the issue that Mr. Potter brought up, which is the alternative uses of this site in the future, or is that outside the scope of what we're here to decide tonight?
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, I would refer you to the conditional use standards for direction on what you are supposed to be, how you're supposed to be reviewing this application. So on pages, starting on page 9, so furthering the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. Pedestrian, looking at the circulation systems, open space, common facilities, landscaping, general location and use of structures, the general standards for conditional use approval, and the specific conditional use standards for natural resource extraction. So those are what you are supposed to be looking at.
Yeah, as always, I mean, I suppose if I really wanted to burrow into the comprehensive plan, I could find, I could get off in the weeds and find arguments for and against this project based on those alternative use arguments. But I guess I didn't know if you had a nice clean answer loaded up in the chamber for me, and I guess you don't. So I was hoping to dispense with that one way or the other. So I'll move on. So, Mr. Strike.
Excuse me, Mr. Walker, could I just say one more thing?
Sure.
Apologize. I would note that on the comprehensive plan for the Chugach Eagle River community, in their comprehensive plan map, this is identified as a community facility. So it certainly that could factor into your thoughts.
Thank you. Okay, well, that brings me to one of my questions for you, Peter, which is you're a talented landscape architect and planner. What do you see, what are you going to do with this gigantic pile of dirt that's going to be a park or whatever use in the future?
Through the chair, I don't know if I'm able to say that for this particular site. A response to that, I think, would be that if you look at the grading plans, that is providing a level area at the surface. So there is a future usable zone for this area. The current site is really quite deep. From where the road enters it, it's 30 feet?
30 feet.
So the site is 30 feet down. So if there were a future use, and I'm hypothesizing, if there were a future use to be consistent with recreation, it's actually providing a built pad much closer to a top area that would be more visible or otherwise. So it's not that this fill site is making a giant mound, it's elevating a working surface.
Okay.
And obviously the side slopes reduce that compared to what is currently existing, but it doesn't negate a future use.
So this thing's filled and flat, and I'm parked on Kerbo Lane. I'm going to be at grade with the top of this pile then?
Yeah.
Okay. In general, I mean, not, okay. And then without my own interpretation of these drawings, can you give me a kind of a quick answer on the difference in grade from the top of the pile to the New Glen Highway or the Glen Highway?
That I wouldn't have handy. I apologize because I don't know what an adjacent grade would be.
Okay.
But if we guesstimate it, it's probably about the 30 feet. It's probably similar. I think the existing site probably has about a similar grade to the Glen, or is it a little bit below?
It's above the Glen.
Okay.
A little bit above the Glen.
We don't have a good answer.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So I don't know if you answered this with Mr. Strike's questions, but do we have an estimated number of trucks per day? And just in a typical summer construction day? I know I'm sure it's going to vary. But.
Typical summer, our contractor can run upwards of 5 side dumps a day with an additional 1 or 2, maybe 3 end dumps. That's probably about the extent that we can get. Sometimes we can get a little larger and get into where we've got 5 or 6 trucks running out of one project, but it's looking at the future, it's probably not going to happen. I think your maximum will be 4 or 5 trucks a day and then a couple end dumps.
Okay. I'm just making sure I've got all my questions answered here. Please bear with me. Super. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. There's no further questions. Any final thoughts?
I think that we'll convert the rest of our time into sleep for you guys.
Thank you.
Later, not now.
Thank you. I'm going to close the public hearing. What's the wish of the body? Mr. Strike.
I'm going to take a stab at this and look for some possible assistance here, but in the case of 2015-0105, the request for conditional use of natural resource extraction, I move that we approve this conditional use, and I would like to add some further clarifications to the division's recommendations.
Go ahead, Mr. Strike.
Okay. In reference to paragraph 7, speaking to the operational hours, I would move that we adopt the Chugach Community Council's verbiage verbatim as they have listed, and I would read that as, in consideration of surrounding residential and recreational uses of nearby properties, the normal operation of the material disposal site shall be limited to Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Allowances for operation beyond normal days' hours shall be permitted for emergency situations only.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. Is that all part of your main motion?
Yes, it is.
And you'd like to continue on the main motion?
Correct.
Okay.
And in reference to paragraph 12, where it speaks to the duration and time extension through September 30th, 2023, I would move to change this timeline to a 3-year duration. My purpose for doing so, is that appropriate to explain here?
Why don't you get your motion on the table, and then I'll let you speak to it, but could you please clarify, is there a specific date?
Add 3 years from 16, 17, so let's go out to 2018,
Thank you.
and the purpose of which is at which time a extensions then would be reviewed. I would request to add a new recommendation that speaks to the materials are to be limited to materials generated from municipal-owned projects, specifically excluding materials from non-municipal-owned projects, to include Eagle River, and/or materials brought in by non-municipal contractors. My purpose of this...
Well, I'll let you speak to it once we get a second, but do you have that, Lori? Okay.
The other item I would like to add is the inclusion of rumble strips.
So given this is the main motion, and you don't have a second yet, would you, and bearing in mind what the petitioner asked for, would you entertain perhaps stating that resolve with staff the need for a rumble strip, or you want the rumble strip regardless?
I believe I want the rumble strips
Very good.
regardless.
Thank you. So that comes down as a 14th condition, is that correct? You added a 13th and a 14th?
Correct.
Is that it for your main motion?
Yes.
You sure?
No.
Is there a second for Mr. Strike's motion? Ms. Dean has seconded. Mr. Strike, would you like to speak to your motion? You can speak to your motion.
Yes, my rationale for the 3-year as opposed to the 5-year is that we have what I would call an untried site. We have a virgin site with little past performance and experience from the on-site personnel, unlike some of our commercial applications. And so this gives an opportunity to review the performance, gives the community councils times to review again these performance, and it would, I could see a longer extension take place after this initial period, but rather than going to the longer period of duration of, say, 5 years, I cut that timeline down to 3, and then the petitioner can request extended time after that point in time. I'm looking at the rumble strip notation as to be consistent across the municipality, and notwithstanding that the egress is coming from a chip seal road, the materials itself, want to make sure that the materials aren't tracked outside, because there is some question, I believe, as to the testing of the materials, and that is to keep the alien materials on this site and not tracked out into the, and it's not just the community, but it's the recreational area that we're going to see kids playing and tracking onto soccer fields or baseball fields or whatever through cars onto other pieces of property. And what was the other item?
Well, you added the verbiage from the community council, and you adjusted the time frame.
Yes.
And as well as limiting to the MOA.
I think that, and I would be open to, I don't know that I hit all of the recommendations, but I think there were some other recommendations that were identified by some other. board members, but I'd be willing to entertain additional recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. Mr. Springs in the queue, but Ms. Dean, do you have any comments as the seconder?
Yes, I think this is an excellent use of a gravel pit that was excavated. It's essentially basically unusable by the public. By bringing this new material in the future, it could very well become additional park area. It's right next to the horseback riding stables and Loretta French Park. So looks like it's something that could really add to the recreational area 10 or 12 years down the line.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Mr. Spring.
Yes, I'd just like to propose an amendment
Go ahead.
regarding the monitoring reports. It's not specified in condition number 12 of the staff report. It just says monitoring reports. I think traditionally the monitoring reports, as Mr. Potter pointed out, include a record of complaints, code enforcement complaints, as well as a report on the volumes of materials that are brought in. I would also like to add perhaps some type of record regarding the number of trucks that enter and exit the facility for dumping purposes.
So Mr. Springs' motion amends condition number 12 to include, is this record or report an annual report? It is, correct? This is an annual report that you're suggesting?
Yes, it's more of a clarification of the contents.
To include the record of complaints or code enforcement issues as well as a report on the volume and truck count.
Right.
Thank you. That is an amendment made by Mr. Spring. Is there a second? Could you hit your, thank you. That is seconded by Mr. Walker. Any additional discussion on that? If not, please.
My only suggestion would be, I was going to make the same amendment, and I was trying to come up with an elegant way of saying this, but just that for renewal, that they would be required to satisfy the same conditions that other area pits are meeting, which is, I think, that they would get this code enforcement report, they would do some level of groundwater testing, and then submit aerial photography of how the site has changed. So I don't know if we can put something in there that just says they're going to meet the same standards that the other pits are meeting. Is that kind of what you were thinking, John? Or?
I think the monitoring reports generally don't include the ones I've seen don't include the groundwater monitoring, but I'd be happy to consider that as part of another separate amendment.
Well, let's keep the groundwater monitoring report outside of this, but I believe Mr. Walker's comment was simply to say that this reporting to be consistent with what is generally done and is practiced by the municipality. Does that work?
Oh, that's fine. Yes.
Okay. Could we please vote on that amendment? That amendment passes. We're back to the main motion. Mr. Spring, are you in there anew?
I guess I'd like to bring up the issue regarding the materials testing at the site, because I'm not sure how to phrase if I was going to propose an amendment, how to phrase it so that it's precise enough and non-ambiguous. So, and I guess I'd like to kind of throw that out for the commission as to whether or not that I should try to propose such an amendment.
Without a motion, I suspect you're looking for a head nod, but I hear Mr. Walker.
This is not exactly in order, but just to get this on the table, I mean, maybe a suggestion of something similar to what I just proposed, which is that we try to hold them to the same standard that other area pits are held to, or whatever typical protocol is taken at these other pits.
We have a main motion on the table unless someone wants to specifically add an amendment to that main motion. Mr. Strike, is that you?
Yeah, I wanted to speak to Mr. Spring's comment in that. I guess I would caution that we have to be careful of the wording here, because it's a long, there's a extreme difference between testing and inspection. And I have not seen testing necessarily always been prevailing, but inspection, yes. But it's incumbent upon the petitioner and the owner and operator of the pit to ensure that that inspection is being done, and that is typically the visual and the sniff test and so forth, and knowing what to do when they get it. I mean, the problem we have here is that the petitioner is the one operating the pit, and they're the ones trying to get rid of their own materials. Therefore, there's a preponderance to there's a preponderance to a lot of times bury the problem. And therefore, the only way to prevent that is to actually test the materials, which goes then beyond the inspection. So my concern is finding that balance. And again, I think this is where I've come back to that 3-year period is we're not going to be building on this site, but we've got to give the operator an opportunity to succeed and not necessarily totally handcuff them. And I'm hoping that this generates conversation and generates amongst us as we see future conditional use permits come before us, that we start leveling the playing field both ways, whether we bring the petitioner up to how everybody else is treated or bring everybody else maybe a notch down and keep it from being as onerous as it seems to be in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. Ms. Bailey.
I'm new to this, so I may be wrong, but would there be a way that we could perhaps have this be an issue resolved with the staff, that inspections need to meet typical standards of the private industry?
You could, if you so desired, make a motion to amend the main motion that suggests something to that effect.
I would like to then make a motion that we have this issue resolved with staff so that the inspection process meets the typical standards of the private industry.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. That amendment has been seconded by John Spring. Any comment on that amendment?
Yeah, I second it because I think it's a good one, and perhaps the an inspection methodology or inspection plan should be submitted as part of this, so that they can submit the plan to the staff and they can review it, and then there's something that they can hold them to. Does that fit in with your motion?
Yeah.
Well, I think to help our clerk, you're going to have to be real specific on what this amendment is. I don't know. Maybe one of you could take an attempt at restating it then.
If you don't mind. Resolve with staff the requirement for materials inspection with a inspection plan to be submitted for review and approval by staff.
Thank you. Ms. Bailey, is that the intent of your amendment?
Yes, it is.
That motion to amend is put forth. Please vote. That passes. We're back to the main motion. Ms. Bailey, Mr. Spring, I think you in the queue. You're not Mr. Spinelli.
I was hoping to speak to the previous motion, the original previous motion. I was in support of it, but basically my intent was that a lot of what I've been hearing with the rumble strips and the testing, I feel a lot of that's going to be covered by a fill and grade permit or stormwater pollution prevention plan. I mean, the rumble strips, I'm not necessarily sure what you meant by that, but I think you meant a construction entrance in accordance with a DEC permit, and I feel like that's going to be a stormwater pollution prevention plan is going to be required, and if not, we could just say require a stormwater pollution prevention plan. But to necessarily specify BMPs really limits anybody's ability to do anything, and it's just kind of philosophically not what I think the Planning and Zoning Commission should be telling people how to design stormwater pollution prevention plans. But, and then that being said, I'll bow out. I want to keep going.
Thank you for throwing down the weed card, Mr. Spinelli. Any additional commissioner wish to speak to the main motion or offer an amendment? Call the question, please. That conditional use is approved. Are there any additional findings? I would like to find that the commission found the petitioner to be, that their application is consistent with both the general standards for conditional use approval and the conditional use standards. I'd also like to find that we heard from the Chugach Community Council in writing and in person, as well as neighboring landowners. And finally, I'd like to note that that the municipality chose not to utilize the new code in its application process, and I'm disappointed in that. That's it for our cases this evening. Before I let you all go, I sent an email out related to the committees that we have, and I know not everyone can attend the director's lunch on Thursday. I did want to at least ask Mr. Strike, is there still a wetlands committee?
There is, and typically they have met, what I've seen, once a year. The last meeting that was attended was by Chairman Ferguson and myself at the City Hall, and this was approximately 7-8 months ago, or 9 months ago.
Okay.
So I've not had any update since then. It's a very sporadic. We're told when it is, and so it.
Okay, so we'll keep that on there, and if it's needed, it'll be utilized. And you're also on there as a budget finance work committee. Is that something that does meet? John shaking his head no.
Not yet.
I believe that was part of the previous administration's
Okay.
concept.
So we put a question mark on that one.
Maybe something for the chair to ask the
Okay.
existing.
And then I have another one on there as a question for the school board as well. We had been invited to participate, and I think Ms. Wong communicated to the email that there is an opportunity coming up here in the spring. Ms. Dean.
I used to be the long-range RPF and policies person, and I think that's something that could just be a one-page report from staff every 6 months or a year, and I don't think it really needs to be a committee. That was my experience. Carol Wong and I would sit down and go through everything that was on the list, and it's actually really informative for the entire commission to know what the plan is.
Yeah, and I would perhaps, thank you, Ms. Dean. I would comment to Hal and staff that, you know, there is under the purview of the Planning and Zoning Commission supposedly an opportunity to review the planning department's work plan for the year. We don't approve it, but I think if we could get into the habit at some point, you know, ideally before you get into your budget conversations, but perhaps early in the year, you can kind of show us what your work plan is intended to be for 2016, and then we move that up a little bit earlier. That'd be great.
Thank you, and I agree. I think it's a good idea.
Great, thank you. I think there's a motion on the table. Is that for something specifically, Mr. Walker?
I'm the adjourner.
All right, there it is. Thank you.